Life is tough, and our country wasn't founded on hugs and kisses.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome to a very special edition of Crosstabs. This is not a regular episode of Crosstabs, although it will appear in your feed as a regular episode of Crosstabs. We have two very special guests, and the reason it's a special episode is not just because of the special guests, but we're also taking a special topic. Now, Crosstabs typically we're focused on the stories of the day, but here we're going to dive deeper into a topic and sort of the past couple of years, even really decades of background on that topic. Today we're talking about education. We have two fantastic guests. I'm along here, of course, with Brian Iverson, who I forgot to introduce earlier.
Thanks.
And he was liable to introduce himself at some point if I forgot to do it. But we've got State Representative Emily McIntire, born and raised in Jackson County, spent her first years in Trail, Oregon, and the last 30 in Eagle Point. She and her husband have two kids. She's actively engaged in local church and centers her life around Jesus. And you are on Eagle Point School Board. And then also with us is Keri Lopez. She's running for state representative in House District 53. That's, I think, a little bit of Bend, but mostly Redmond and Sun River. And not Sun River, I'm sorry. Redmond and Sisters. Gosh dang it. It's the old district. The old district has Sisters.
Oh, that's right.
But Sisters wasn't in the district before Sun River was, and we traded them.
Yeah.
And the reason we traded them is because of Democrat gerrymandering. Sisters includes more Democrats than Sun River does. So I just want to make that clear. Yes, so Redmond, Sisters, and a little bit of Bend, I think, if I remember right. And she is a born and raised lifelong Oregonian. She's not afraid of hard work. She's a proud graduate of Oregon State University, go Beavs, and had a successful career. I'm going to start that again. She had a successful career in the financial services industry. She earned her Series 7 and Series 66. I can't wait to find out what those are because I have no idea. And then her and her husband have been building homes in Central Oregon, and she was elected to the Redmond School Board in 2021, reelected in 2023. And she's been focused on advocating for local decision-making, community and parent involvement, and transparency at the local school board. So we thought two school board members in the legislature, you've got a cross-section here of an issue that's both local and statewide. So welcome, Keri, and welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Happy to be
intro.
here.
Yeah.
And all with very little preparation. Just a little help from Brian Iverson and the biographies he sent me, just to let people behind the producing curtain.
I always prepare and Reagan doesn't, so that's why he takes all my preparation notes and he makes himself sound smarter than me. So that's not really fair, but otherwise. No, I'm excited for this episode. I think it's gonna be great. We want to really dive into education and just kind of keep it to what's going on with education in Oregon and really the idea of having two school board members as well as one current state rep that will continue, and then one that will be a state rep after this election is over. It's going to be great to really kind of get their thoughts on where we're heading with education in Oregon. So I think we should start with really the biggest news, Reagan, is that Oregon Live article that loved to talk about my favorite school district in all of Oregon, Portland Public Schools, where they quietly adopt the rule barring teachers from political or personal classroom displays. This school district is off the rails. I don't understand Portland Public Schools. This one just really blows me away. And of course now they're pushing back on the teachers union, of course, is saying, well, that's not fair. You can't do that. You have to let us display our stuff. You guys probably know this in your school districts. Is there rules against this, or is this against collective bargaining? Because that seems to be where the rub is. So Representative, I figure out, let's start with you. Like, what's your guys's, do you have a policy in regards to what teachers can hang in a classroom?
I actually think if we don't, we do, right? Like even if we don't have an actual board policy, because I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but this has been a topic of discussion as we move through things. And when we start having things that are going up in classrooms, because we're in a very conservative district, and we really don't want to be having our parents posting things on Facebook about what's being displayed or talked about in a classroom that just takes away from learning, right? Like that's the whole goal, is to not distract from learning. So I know we've had a couple of things pop up, and we tend to hear about them almost immediately, and then we start making some phone calls as board members, and then we don't hear about them anymore. That's kind of how it works. So yeah.
No, there's no, you're telling me there's no stop the genocide posters hanging up down in the Eagle Point School District?
I haven't heard that yet, and truly, when stuff like that goes up, I don't know how it is with Keri's district, but school board members, it either gets posted on Facebook. That's usually the first line of information, or we start getting some phone calls and text messages from people that feel comfortable enough to just go to us directly. So yeah.
Yeah,
I think.
fair.
Go ahead.
Yep, I'd say that's fair. We actually had this conversation not just a few days ago about information circulating on Facebook, and that's a lot of times often how rumors start and end up coming our direction. But I would say, even in Redmond, there's still a fair amount of face-to-face conversations that happen with people, and that connection is still, and we are able to have those conversations directly with people and get them to the superintendent as those things come up.
I think also, and I tweeted this, Brian, you may have seen this, but I think that if a teacher is going to put a poster, it shouldn't be misinformation. And since there isn't actually a genocide happening in Gaza, I think if you had a policy that said we're not allowing teachers to teach mis, dis, and malinformation, which seems to be pretty big on the other side of the aisle, and then you just say, oh, hey, can you take down your misinformation poster about because there isn't a genocide in Gaza? One, that would make them very mad because I think they would be upset about that. Because of course the people on the internet have declared there's a genocide happening. Let's not pretend that there's actually a definition of this. And I'm sorry, I always go off on Israel because it makes me crazy how they talk about it. But I think that would be a new and fun approach, because the issue is, and the article brings this up, Brian, Newberg did this. They were trying to get certain teachers to take down, I think it was like a pride flag or whatever, and it was declared anti-First Amendment. The ACLU actually sued the Newberg School District. Now, shockingly, the Portland Public School District, ACLU isn't here to sue them. They're trying to resolve it a different way because they don't want people to think that this could also happen in Portland. This is only supposed to happen in right-wing rural Oregon, not in Portland. But of course, they're trying to minimize the disruption they have. And gets to the funding issue, really. The enrollment declines. I think that a lot of families who don't feel at home with a lot of the far left ideology that's being pushed by radical teachers unions, especially, right? And some of those teachers, not all teachers, I want to make that clear, not all teachers are pushing that,
Right.
but I think that there's an extreme element that really are trying to push that first. So there's families, there are students that don't feel comfortable, and as a result, they're switching to homeschooling, they're switching to virtual, they're switching to private schools. That is causing a lot of the enrollment declines that are going to cause and really drive the next problem that we're seeing. And I wanted to talk to you, Rep. McIntire, specifically about this, and I didn't put this in Brian's notes because I didn't even remember it until we started this conversation.
Okay.
There was a work group, I think, that started about education funding. They were going to put together a bipartisan piece of legislation that was going to address school funding. And I think that may have started either in the 23 or 24 session. I think you were a part of that effort, right? Can you tell you weren't a part of that effort? Okay, so I'm misremembering it then. The main thing that came out of that was they started on it and then they killed it because they wanted to make it a political tax raising issue in 25, basically. And what I would like to
Right.
see is an attempt to address school funding that isn't so much based on politics and try to raise taxes, and really just figuring out what the funding levels are that we need and where can we focus our energies. So what are you guys
Yeah.
seeing at the local level in terms of funding? Are you guys getting enough funding, not enough funding? Are you being forced to spend it in places you don't want to and you'd like to be more flexible? We could start with Keri and then go to Emily on that. How do you guys feel the school funding is right now from a local perspective?
You can start, Emily, you can start, and then I'll pick up on
Okay. Okay. So I was part of the effort in really wanting to make sure that we wanted to find what the actual current service level really was. Especially when we were talking about the quality education model, and then being a school board member and knowing all of our costs and going through our budget and understanding how our specific school district does our budget. I think there's a huge differentiation across the state. And I also feel that a lot of the policy that comes out of the state capitol is geared toward the dysfunction of Portland Public School as opposed to all the other school districts. And we just have to deal with the fallback of all the policy that's directed at that specific school district. You'd think at this point that they would just disband Portland Public and break it into multiple schools and not have it be such this giant monster that it is in the state, but whatever. So, but as far as funding, and I feel like in the 23 session, I would say we were already underfunded, but there were a couple of really big bills that came through that made our underfundedness even more apparent and transparent. With a couple different bills that passed, we really ramped up our special education services. We gave unemployment to our classified staff members. Um, there were four really big things that we did that were huge additional costs to our school districts with no additional funding. And I'm not remembering the other two right off the top of my head, but um, we had a meeting where we talked about our special education funding, and in the 21-2 school year, because we had the conversation in the 23 session, schools spent $1.1 billion on special education funding, and the state spent $550 million. So right there, schools are spending 50% more than what the state has allocated in their special education funding. And then to top that off, we passed Senate Bill 819, which required schools to bring back all of their students that were on abbreviated days. And it's working itself out. I do have to admit that there were schools that were not following the law in regards to their special education students. So that piece of forcing schools to bring back students that they should have been serving in a much better way is good, but we didn't put any additional funding with it. And we have students that cost upwards of over $100,000 to make sure that they themselves are safe, the people caring for them are safe, and the students around them are safe. And and for the most part, what the students get between $10,000 and $15,000 are allocated. I don't actually know the direct number. I thought it was closer to 10. I just heard it was closer to 15. I don't know what the number is exactly. Per student is spent. $100,000 per student is for some of these students is not something that a school district can easily absorb. So yeah, it's and I know the governor has recommended a huge increase in spending, which I am grateful for. My big concern is that we're going into 2025 and we're going to have a whole nother slew of unfunded mandates, and that's a big concern for me. I think the addition that she has requested is a start, but I don't think that I still don't think it even touched on all the requirements that school is supposed to provide for its students. What do you think, Keri?
Yeah, so when I was thinking about this, I know I know that our school district in particular is struggling to manage the requirements of Senate Bill 819, and there are school districts throughout the state of Oregon that are also struggling to implement and fund and find people that are able to day in, day out work with these children who need extra supports. So when I was thinking about funding in terms of where has our money in education gone, and where did it come from before? A lot of it, a lot of our schools were funded by being able to buy timber sales, right?
Yeah.
And that's not happening because of our habitat conservation plan. Mills are closing, so we take these higher level topics and we think, oh, that's not affecting education. But when we start to look at where our funding for education used to come from, we look at timber receipts. We also have to look at Measure 110. We had funding coming into education from the marijuana tax, right? Marijuana revenue. And that money was diverted from education and from public safety as well into mental health services. And I think our kids get left behind when we start diverting money from education into other social programs that aren't targeted specifically for kids, because in reality, our kids were left out of the Measure 110 piece when it comes to addiction and treatment and recovery.
Isn't so, and then you couple all of that you just talked about with the revenue side of it, and then you throw in the special education kids that cost way more than what you get per student, and then you have declining enrollment. So you have special education kids coming back into the system who cost more. You have regular students that are leaving the system, at least in Portland and Salem and some
everywhere.
Yeah,
Everywhere.
Not in Cook County. We have a booming enrollment in our public school system. Oh, that's right. We flipped the school board here. Now it's conservative. But I think, I don't know, is it growing, Keri, or declining?
So this is one thing I'm really proud of that we are doing here in Redmond. Our enrollment is up. And we don't have final numbers, but what I'm hearing from elementary schools and high schools is that they're enrolling. We're still continuing to see enrollment, kids enrolling in schools. So after school starts, that's what happens. Sometimes parents decide to enroll their kids, but that's a testament to the work that we're doing on our school board, right? We're bringing balance to the conversation, and we're saying, hey, we're not going to pick up some of the more politically divisive, explosive issues. We're going to work through those, and we're going to respect people in the process. But at the same time, I think that's why people, teachers, students, families want to be a part of the Redmond School District, because we really are doing good work to build bridges and bring people together and have this Redmond be an awesome place that your kids want to go to school.
All right, Brian and Keri, calm down. Emily and I are over here going like, yeah, everybody wants to live in Central Oregon. It's so amazing. The quality of life is so, yeah, we hear you, all right. We're tired of it. I grew up in Central Oregon. Bend, though, it's not as great as you want to think it is. Unless, of course, you are a granola crunching, kale loving liberal, in which case it is as amazing as you think it is. Anyway,
it is.
Yes.
I think the regular people are going to Redmond, are coming to Prineville to go to school, I think, because even Ben couldn't pass that school bond. I think it's the first school bond they haven't been able to pass in a long time. Was this last year, this last spring, trying to pass that school bond, and Portland had that same problem as well. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing, and just is this need, and then the goal is to get more students ultimately, and then you got all the private schools nipping at everybody's heels, and all the things. I know Eagle Point has a good private school. I know there's some good education alternatives now, that people look towards versus sending your kids to public school for all the things that we hate about it. But I just, the answer isn't more money, and that's really what always seems to be where the governor is going to, where these teachers unions go to, OEA goes to. It's always more money, and to that whole point that Rep. McIntire talked about in the beginning, like all of the things that we have to fund, they aren't actually helping us produce better classrooms and better kids. You're now giving somebody unemployment benefits. You're giving these things that we're funding that aren't actually helping us make better students. And that's really the problem.
And I think you're right, Brian, but I want to put a little bit of a finer point on this, and then I want to kind of ask a question. So this will be a question about local control, but I'm going to relate it to funding first. So you're right, Brian. We don't need more money. I think what we need is redirecting of the money more into the classroom. This is something that Republicans have harped on, right? That includes paying teachers better, by the way. I think that that's important, especially new teachers. So Oregon's pretty competitive for people who've been teaching for a while in terms of salaries, but new teachers are pretty low on the list. I wrote a memo about this a few months ago in terms of how Oregon's behind on new teacher salaries. So we could increase salaries, we could increase signing bonuses, we could do things that they do for doctors, which is pay them an extra benefit if they go to teach in a rural school district versus a city school district, right? There's all kinds of things that you could do to incentivize, build workforce, which I know is a problem. The workforce we don't need to build is the administrative workforce, especially like in the Albany schools. I know there was a talking point, one of our school board candidates here, in I think 5 or 10 years, the administrative district staff doubled as enrollment increased 15%. That's not
crazy.
sustainable, right? And so I think what people will be tempted to do is paper over that with more money, right? So they don't have to make the hard decisions in terms of cutting administrative positions, right? The flip side of that, though, and one of the things I've heard the governor say that I'm concerned about, the traps sort of being laid for Republicans here, where we can support more school funding, is one, the taxes, which is always going to be a problem. They want to increase taxes to increase school funding. They did that last time with the Student Success Act, right? Where in order to get more funding, you are going to have to support this tax on businesses. The other piece of it is that the governor's talked about accountability, and I think accountability is good, but what accountability doesn't mean is taking away local control, decision making about what resources students can use, what textbooks you're going to use, all that stuff. And my concern, and tell me if you guys feel this, is the state trying to take away control from the local school districts. And how do you think that you as school board candidates or school board members can push back on that? Can you push back on that in the legislature, and can parents help with that?
Keri, do you want to answer, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. I kind of want to go back to what happened in Bend, and the operating levy was on the ballot, and that failed in Bend. The people in Bend said, no more, we're not giving you any more money. We're not going to raise our taxes so that you can have more money to operate your schools. And I think that sends a really clear message about what people are thinking in terms of education. So Brian, you might be spot on as far as, saying more money doesn't solve the problem. I also want to touch on the fact that in Redmond School District this last year, we were able to raise our teacher salaries and actually get them up to a level that was competitive with other districts in our area. We were significantly below that. So when we think about Redmond being a place that teachers want to be, that piece of salary conversation has to happen. We have to stay competitive with other districts, other neighboring districts. And we're happy that we have really consistent, really great staff on board. And I do have to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. I'm speaking on behalf of myself when I'm talking about the work that we're doing in
disclaimer.
Yep. But I am really proud of the work that we're doing, and I'm thankful that we do have the ability to exercise a level of local control that we can, and I think our board is good at doing that through our curriculum selection. Sure, we have lists that come from the state, but we also have opportunities. I sit on curriculum committees with our teachers, and our community members are welcome to join us in going through curriculum. And we get to choose. We do have a choice in that respect.
I think it's kind of interesting. So I want to go back to the more money doesn't solve the problem. And I would say yes and no, right? And I think accountability is a huge factor. And we were talking a little bit before the show, the loss of the essential skills requirement and what actually is the goal of K-12 education. And I feel like over the past decade, as we've gotten to be a more more woke society, and as we've seen, I feel like the general public's dissatisfaction in education continue to snowball. Like we have people are just so fed up with public education in general, but there's a monopoly on public education. You got to be able to have an extra $10,000 to $20,000, depending on how much your private school is, to be able to send your kid to private school, or you have to have a functioning charter school, and then you have to get in on the wait list, right? Like we have 100 plus on our wait lists, locally, and it's difficult to open a charter. You have to have a school district that's willing to sponsor you. And most school districts don't want to sponsor a charter because they see that as dollars out the door for themselves. And so we have such a dysfunction when it comes to saying it's a competition on who gets the kids, right? When that is the last thing the K-12 education should be about. It should be about raising successful human beings being ready to contribute to society, right? And that's not what I really see education being about right now. And so it's the other side of that is the money side of it. I mean, the things schools are providing: sick pay, vacation leave, awesome benefits, all of these things that have exponentially gone up in cost due to choices that either the federal or state government has made. So I do think we need to revisit the cost. I don't think that it's the answer to all the problems. And we haven't even touched on facilities, right? Most of our facilities are 50 years old or more, and that's not in an addition that we get statewide. That's whatever the schools get, that's what the schools get, and they're responsible for maintaining their buildings. The state doesn't give additional money for that. So if you can't pass a bond, like my district can't, we're trying to nickel and dime and duct tape things together. We got kids that are sitting in classrooms that are, 90 degrees on a hot day and 50 degrees on a cold day. And it's going to cost us, 10 to $12 million to fix that system. I'm talking about this because we just had a meeting this morning, so it's fresh in my mind. But we were able to kind of nickel and dime things together and spend $1.5 million with help to make some solutions here. But it's certainly not a forever solution. So money is a factor. But what we are delivering in the K-12 system is also a huge factor. And the goal currently, I feel like in our state for education, is we just want to love the kids, right? We just want to love them and they can't do wrong. And we just love them to death. And that's going to be the best education that they need. We're going to give them food. We're going to give them clothes. We're going to give them a hug. We're going to give them a safe space. Instead of saying, we need to do that, and I don't want to sound insensitive, right? But life is tough, and our country wasn't founded on hugs and kisses. It was founded on blood, sweat, tears, sacrifice, starvation, a crisis. And our kids are capable, and we don't give them credit for what they are capable to be able to absorb, learn, be held accountable to, all of those things. So accountability is a huge one for me. I think funding is a huge one as well. But the local control factor is another huge conversation. And as you can tell, I like talking about this. So I'll try and make this brief. But it is interesting that like Albany can double their administrative budget, right? And they get to do that. But then you've got maybe Redmond and Eagle Point where we scrimp and save on our admin budget, right? So what is the role of the state potentially to say, you can only spend this much of your state dollars on administration. You can only spend this much of your state dollars on employment. You can only spend, so that because schools are a business. Like this,
Well,
exactly how much money you're going to get. Go ahead, Keri.
They aren't run like a business.
But they should be. They should be.
But they aren't, because we're dealing with the social services issue, right? We're dealing with kids who really, need additional supports. And our school districts, you're right, Emily, have come from a place where we were, reading, writing, and arithmetic, to now our public schools are social services providers as well. And that's a big change and a big shift that I've seen, even throughout my kids being in public school since kindergarten, since I've been in public school way back when. We're really providing a lot of social services, and it takes a toll on our staff, and it takes a toll on our budgets. And that's something that we really need to think about as we move away from the foundational things that we're providing as a school. There was something that popped up recently that said Oregon is 45th in the nation. We rank 45th in the nation. And to me, that is unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. And we've been at the bottom. Oregon has been in the bottom in education for years.
Don't you?
It's unacceptable. Oregon also has the least amount of seat time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think sometimes I think left-wing school districts and states on some level, they even almost want to be on the bottom, so then they can just say, see, you're not spending enough. It's almost like this need to continue to feed this beast. I mean, we're at 30% of our budget. 30% goes to education in Oregon. We had the most we've ever spent in a biennium was this last cycle, the most ever in the history of Oregon. Yet we're getting the worst output. And I think, as far as like 45th in the nation, right? And I almost feel like it's their sense of this desire, of this rallying cry that we just got to keep. If we just had more money, if the quality education model said 15 billion, well, if we just had 15 billion, we would achieve all of these metrics. And that wouldn't happen. Like if we give them 15 billion tomorrow, we wouldn't achieve the outputs that they say we get if we spend that amount of money, because money does matter, but it's not the end all be all to making sure that we have good education and that the output, kids coming out of the other side of it, are good people, that they're educated, they can read, write, they can move on to college, they can swing a hammer, they can do whatever it is that they're going to do after high school. And I feel like we focus more on, to your aspect, Keri, is like the social aspect of it now, right? That we almost like have to re-engineer our kids because we want them learning about these other things, sexualization and all this stuff. I don't want to get into that too much, but it feels like that's what we're trying to push versus just teaching them how to make it through. Rocky did my favorite thing, and it wasn't Rocky, it was like Sylvester Stallone said it in, I don't know, some movie somewhere. He says, you only go to college. You don't go to college because you're actually, going to learn something. You go to college and you get a degree because, and this is, I think, applicable to high school, because an employer down the road can say, you did something for 4 years. You showed up, you did reasonably well, you got through it. And so in hopes that when you come work for me, that you're going to show up, do reasonably well in your job, and that, I can move forward. And I think kind of with high school, we need to go back to that whole idea that, make kids that you have to push them to achieve something. You have to push because they're not being pushed to achieve now. And in college, I was just talking to my son, who's his first year of college. He's like, Dad, I had a pop quiz yesterday and I didn't know it was coming, and I only got 7 out of 10, and that's like a D. And I'm like, well, that means you should be studying. He goes, yeah, but I didn't know it was coming. I said, yeah, welcome to college. Like, you don't get to know what's coming every second,
So that's one thing that concerns me about, even when we talk about essential skills, what that did was made it so that we're putting less emphasis on SAT prep, and part of part of being in college is doing the work, right? And SAT scores, when we said, hey, these don't really matter, like everybody's not going to go to college, we're not going to do that. We're also doing a disservice to kids who are going to college and may go to a college that's actually looking at SAT scores, PSAT scores, and preparing our kids to pass those tests and do that work so that they can have access to scholarships.
Yeah, and I would say the other side of that is, even if we invested $15 billion more tomorrow, you're not going to see the return on that investment until maybe your first, second, and third graders are graduating. I think that's the other thing that we think of, is we think investment means that next year's graduating students are going to be top of the line, college bound, license bound, know exactly where they're going to go. And that's just not how it works in education. I mean, we got to go back. Before COVID, we had a vast amount of kids. I would put a number at maybe 40%, 50% of our kids were a year behind where they needed to be. You kind of have your numbers, like your 10, 15% are your special education kids. They're only going to be able to do what they're able to do. And then you have about 20 to 30% that are going to excel or do well no matter what situation environment that they are in. And then you have the rest of those kids that are somewhere in the middle. And depending on circumstances, their engagement, whatever, is going to depend on their success. And if they don't find that special thing that excites them, they're going to struggle. They're waving more back and forth. And so those kids were already behind before COVID. And then we went out in COVID, and those kids now are 2 to 3 years behind where they need to be. So but then you've got schools that have to teach at their grade level. So you've got ninth graders coming in that are functioning at a sixth, seventh grade level, but they're learning ninth grade information. And so then they have all these holes. So pop quizzes are super detrimental to them, because you're expecting them to remember stuff from years gone by, right? Most can accomplish that day's work, but it's the tests that really get them. And that's where I think a lot of the essential skills suspension came in, because it really shows the amount of holes that these kids have. They have to have foundational knowledge built in, and they don't have it. This huge group of kids do not have the foundational skills that they needed to be able to pass that. So we have to look educationally. If you do a big investment in education, you're not going to see a return on that investment potentially for a decade, because you're really investing that into those kids that don't have all the holes. You're building their foundation. And so it just makes education the easiest thing to attack, the easiest thing to throw under the bus, but the hardest thing to actually get a good return on investment. And this isn't all schools, like Lost River and Klamath. They have a very small school. They have 100% graduation rate and 100% placement rate after graduation, right? They're going to a college, they're going into a program. They all know exactly where they're going. Like, if you want to get a good kid out of high school, you hire a kid out of Lost River, right? Like, the other thing, and I would say Keri would probably say this too, like, I look at my superintendent, my administration at my school district, and my teachers, they are working their butts off to do everything they possibly can for these students. And it's millimeters moving forward, and a success story is, we got this kid to come 5 days to school in a row. I mean,
Sure.
That's what we're looking at as levels of success right now. It's not passing the SATs. It's like, oh my gosh, you took a shower, put deodorant on, and brushed your teeth. Oh my gosh, like, I'm going to give you a Dutch Bros card. I mean, it's crazy that's what we're incentivizing our kids for.
But I will say, our school board, and again, I keep going back to bragging on the good work that we're doing, but we really focused on, it was something that I was made aware of, that we had students in our buildings that were not reading at grade level. And we know that if you are in third grade and you are not reading at third grade level, it has detrimental effects down the road. So we started focusing on that, and we are moving the needle in a really big way. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. We just went over them at our last school board meeting, but it's impressive, the work that's being done. So absolutely, our superintendent, our staff, the instructional coaches, and quite frankly, maybe even the students and the parents are putting in a little extra work because they realize, hey, like, our kids can do this. They can do hard things. They are resilient. And I think it's important to recognize, yes, the work that is being done. We're moving the needle in attendance in a really big way. We've been told, like, attendance is a really hard metric to move. We're doing it because we have really great people that are really committed to that work. And our board has put an emphasis on that metric because we know if kids show up for school, they're partway there, right? If they can at least get themselves through the door. And you know what, Emily? Oftentimes for a lot of kids in our district, it is getting up and being able to take a shower.
That's right.
I mean, the reality that some kids face is starkly different than a lot of kids.
100%.
Yeah, that's why it drives me crazy when my kid doesn't actually shower when he goes to school. I'm like, what are you doing? Go back there and take a shower, brush your teeth, and get to school, and put on a decent pair of jeans. Don't wear the same gear because you have that ability, right? There's other kids that don't. Mm-hmm. What do you guys see? Well, probably two different questions. I would say one, Emily, what do you, because you kind of sit in the education world, even within the halls of the legislature, if not on the committees, you're definitely talking. What are you kind of seeing coming down 2025? If you had a crystal ball, what's the things being bantered about? And then my other question to Keri would be is what do you want to do when you get there in the education? Like, what are the things we need to work on? And start with you, Representative, with what are you kind of seeing coming besides funding? Let's maybe set that aside because I think we beat that dead horse enough. But what do you see otherwise coming down the road?
I'm hearing teacher prep programs, making sure that our teachers are prepared in school, making sure that they know how to teach, that they're capable and qualified to teach. The cell phone ban, I'm hearing, we're talking about how to get cell phones out of classrooms. I'm hearing trying to do some fixes to Senate Bill 819, though I'm not hearing what exactly those fixes are quite yet. But I know behavior in classrooms is something that people are really ready to start addressing and trying to figure out. A bill that I am personally putting through is a bill that's a task force or a work group, whichever one I can get, that's to study what our actual graduation requirements are. Again, for me, it's that what is the goal of education? And because we're not really moving with the needle of trying to reinstate the essential skills requirement, if we were able to get this task force through, it would then say this is what the goal of education is. This is what's required for graduation. And my hope is then we could start building backwards, right? Like, well, if this is what's needed for 12th grade, then this is 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th. And we could actually start setting those priority standards statewide, as opposed to right now, the standards are just crazy town. So those are the things. Behavior, I think is huge, which I would put in relation with the cell phones, and funding is going to be a big thing. I will tell you, my biggest thing is going to be, I'm not passing any unfunded mandates at all. And I also really don't want to be adding anything big to our schools. And without fail, we add something big because somebody's got a great idea. And I do understand and respect that. We just need to take a pause. I mean, I just can't say it enough. We need to let people catch up with what we've required. So that's kind of what I'm hearing, but I'm not in, we all get so isolated in the interim. So I'm not hearing a ton. I'm very interested to see what our Ledge Days schedule is going to look like. Well, I know it, but I need to look at our Ledge Days agenda or whatever and see what we're talking about. So
Emily, I think it's really interesting that I'm hearing those same things. I'm hearing that we really do need to seriously look at Senate Bill 819, and decide and determine if what's actually the unintended consequences of what's happening because of that bill is actually what we were trying to address. We really, really need to take a hard look at that. The other thing about cell phones that I think is really, really interesting. I don't know about your school board, Emily, but our school board, we have the ability right now, and we have policy on the books right now in regards to cell phones and what are responsible uses of those. We have student handbooks, we have things like that. So I fall back on local control on this one, because kids are using phones for lots of things these days, and not just for social media and not just to be mean and bully kids. They're using them to actually monitor their blood sugars or
yeah, totally.
things like that. So they can be used for good. And there's a time and a place for them. And our school boards do have the authority to set policy. So that's my take on that. I don't know that that's something else that the state needs to, it needs to get involved in, and along with unfunded mandates, right? So are we gonna, if we're looking at that, are we gonna give funding for if a school wants to adopt a policy that says, hey, you're gonna lock your kids' cell phones in a pouch, right? Those pouches can cost $20-$25, maybe upwards of that, and then kids lose them, or quite frankly, I've heard that kids will just find a workaround.
They always do.
They
They always do. So the thing with and I'll just say this so that it could be, because I had this conversation yesterday. Most likely this bill is going to be a local control bill. I mean, I don't see it passing any other way, and I wouldn't really advocate for it to be anything but. But the fact of the matter is, we do have school districts that are afraid of their parents and they don't want to actually enforce this. And the administration is not having the guts to really support their teachers and having their teachers helping them enforce it. And I don't see us at all mandating yonder bags or anything that would be exponentially expensive. That would be a local control issue. So if your school district wanted to do yonder bags, it'd be up to you to fund it, right? We have schools now that put all their cell phones in a box, right? And then they pick them up at the end of the day. I don't think it even needs to be that extensive. There's policy in Florida and Illinois that we're kind of going off of, and it's very inclusive. It allows for students that have exceptions to keep their cell phones. It just basically is telling school districts they need to get some policy and they need to do their best to enforce it. When I read the policy, I'd like it to be a little bit stronger, but I don't think we're going to get that through at the state level. That's going to be up to the local control to make it stronger and then to enforce it. But I'd just simply like to see students putting their phones in their bags and not having them out during class time unless the teacher specifically tells them to take it out. I mean, I know of a school district that if a student gets a call during class, a personal call, the student can step into the hallway and take their call. We have elementary students' parents calling them on their cell phones during school. And so this is like, the local control issue. This is going to be up to schools to communicate better to parents. It's going to be up to administration to make sure they're supporting their teachers. But this isn't going to be any additional cost to a school district at all. But hopefully it's going to give those school districts that, in my personal opinion, are making really poor choices when it comes to distractions in the classroom, the kick in the pants that they need to enforce that better. And I totally agree with you, Keri. We do have the ability to do all of this at the local level, but they're not. And so for those districts that don't have the guts to do it, it's going to be a pretty cream puff legislation, in my opinion, but it will be enough that they will be required to have something. And they can figure out what that something is.
I think you just coined a new phrase, Reagan. We'll have to use it in the building. Cream puff legislation.
Cream puff legislation. That's right.
On
We'll
the-
need LC to work on official definition of what cream puff
Oh,
legislation
that would be
is,
Yeah.
of
great.
course,
Wouldn't
because
that be awesome?
everybody's gonna
That-
try. There's gonna be a cream puff caucus. Everyone's gonna try to join it. It's gonna be a disaster. I
so
will
much
say
for the
this:
cookie caucus.
if
Yeah.
you're calling your kids while they're in school and it's not an emergency, homeschool them if you can't. If you got a helicopter parent that badly, you should be homeschooling your children. Let's just calm down. Parents need to calm down a little bit. Is a part of this because a lot of this is parents taking their anxiety about their kids and putting it on them by forcing them to carry a cell phone and then using it to distract them all the time, right? And I think that's just as bad as
Oh, yeah.
as a kid who's doing it to themselves, right? Or asking their parent to do it. So
Why don't you have
Um,
Life 360 on? Why can't I see you at school? Why,
Yeah.
Mom, because they told me how to turn my cell phone off. I mean, that's my son. Our school has actually done. My youngest is still, he's a junior, so they're definitely changed their cell phone policy, but it's done class by class. So he has a welding class where his professor doesn't, or the teacher, doesn't care if Britt has a cell phone or not, right? But then in his history class, she or he wants to make sure, so they put their cell phones in a box when they come in. And if when he's done lecturing and then they do their work, and they finish it, then he lets them go get their cell phone. So, and he's like, it's not bad. I mean, if I really need it, he had to step out to call me one day because he wasn't feeling really good and had a headache. And his teacher let him grab his cell phone and he called me and, boom. It's not that big of a deal. And I don't know why we definitely don't need legislation. I'm with you. I mean, I think it would be cream puff and it's all just so they can put their name in a headline. And I think that's silliness. So what we need to do is focus on, just giving the schools the tools, which apparently they have, to just go ahead and do it. And I think kids will follow, I don't know.
well, I want to thank.
I wanna go back.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to go back to something you said about your task force. We should definitely talk because I think we're doing some really cool things in Redmond, and it's in regards to report card transparency or parent teacher conference. And it's just a way that we can bridge the communication between and support for the parent teacher relationship. And it started out by last August. I proposed something called RSD guarantees, and of course, people in the world get really nervous when you start trying to guarantee things. So it has evolved into like something that we're calling RSD collective commitments, but it's at each grade level where your student should be in a clear, concise manner. So we know that if your child is not reading at third grade level, we need to put in some work. So maybe that looks like, extra reading at home. Maybe that looks like a tutor, whatever that looks like for that student. Maybe that looks like a reading group, a different reading group at school. But we're doing some really great work around that so that we can communicate effectively with our parents and get students on track to where they need to go. Because you're absolutely right, Emily. Our state standards are really difficult to wade through.
Yeah, and they contradict each other, and so part of the reason for this too, and you'll see this, Keri, when you're in the legislature, is we just added two additional, course requirements, civics and financial literacy, to our graduation requirements, right? But we actually teach financial literacy in the 7th grade, and did we remove that from the standard?
No.
Nope, we didn't. So I just think the goal is to kind of do a reset. So when people are thinking, oh, you know what our students need, and if they only have this, then all the world is going to be solved. Trying to get people to go, let's look at what our current graduation requirements are and what are you asking to do? And does it fit within that, kind of a thing. So I love that though. And that's the other side. I just want to say for local control, right? Like that's phenomenal. Like we don't do that. We don't have that transparency. I know we've talked about it, but as far as having something accessible to parents like that, we don't have that. I would love that. I'm going to go back to my superintendent with that because I don't think that's difficult to do, right? It's just, posting it on the website or giving it as report cards, whatever. But this is where it's like there's so many school districts because your school board is just a whole bunch of elected people that don't know what they're doing, and you learn what to do as you go about.
Yep.
And so it makes it hard, right, for local coaching because I'm like, we should legislate that, Karen. Like, let's do that. I mean, and that's where we start getting the state doing things that they probably shouldn't do that a board is totally able to do. But if a board doesn't know, then, so
Yeah.
it's a bit of a mess. Yeah.
Sounds like the 90 people in the legislature that get together. That
Yeah,
don't know
pretty
what to
much.
do. Whoops.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys have been generous with your time. I know that, well, Keri's got to get back on the campaign trail. Emily, I'm sure you do too, technically, but your seat's a little safer, so probably not knocking 100,000 doors every day like Keri is. But where can we find you? Let's start with Keri. Keri, where can we find you online? How is it best for people to get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
So the best place is through my website, KeriLopez.com. The other place that you can find me, if I'm not on your doorstep, you can find me at a football field or in a gym. That's where you're
Awesome.
or in a boardroom or a meeting. I'm kind of all over the place. I'd like to think I'm not hard to find, and I welcome the conversation if you see me.
And maybe soon people will find you on television as well.
I think that's
We'll see if Brian does his job.
That's a real thing that's happening. I've had friends sending me messages. So.
We're on TV now.
Yeah.
Oh, great. All right. Good.
are.
That's great. Emily, how about you? How can people find you, contact you? Or would you just prefer they don't? I mean, that's fine too. It's totally up to you, honestly.
I have not updated my website in a few years, but it is so it's a little needs to be updated. So
Did I
working
build that
on
one?
it, but
Did I build that
no,
one for you? No, you built that
no,
one yourself. Yeah.
yeah. So it's on me to update it, but just finding the time to do it. So it's voteemilymcintyre.com, but I would say to email my legislative account, or honestly, if you Google my name, my cell phone number pops up, give me a call. So
Whoops.
I put my cell phone number out there, so it's out in the universe. So anyway, and I'm happy to talk to me. I'm usually in Klamath or around town, out and about, and pretty easy to get a hold of.
I would say Rep McIntire has been one of those rising stars that I've seen in the legislature from when she was a freshman this last time to now. She's coming in and she's going to be like fired up. She's got it. She knows everything. She knows where all the stuff's hidden. She knows where all the bathrooms are on every floor.
I know the bathrooms. That's
She
true.
knows-
That's true.
But
Well, and
maybe we might actually have a full Capitol. I don't know if they'll actually open up the whole. I don't know if they'll get it done by.
Oh yeah, that's
Have the
true.
Capitol open by January. I doubt it. We'll see Ledge Days in
No.
a couple of weeks what it looks like, but I guarantee it'll still be closed off.
I heard
They say
spring.
they're going to be done in 25, but it's not going to be. They're not going to be opening everything up in January for the 25 session. I
No.
bet a bunch of it they're going to be finishing up like last week of session. They open the Capitol.
Yeah, once we leave,
It'll be great. It'll be awesome. So and you serve on both the higher education and education committee. Do you have anyone else that serves on both of those committees, or are you the only one?
Tracy Kramer is kind of in the same boat I'm in. We're both on joint ways and means education, on education, and she's on early learning education, and I'm on higher education. So she and I kind of
Nice.
circle education top to bottom. So
Nice.
we'll see where we end up for next session.
we need
Yes.
to get you on healthcare or something. We got to start rounding out your
Yeah,
abilities
I'm
here.
asking. I'm asking. I was trying to get on natural resources, but then I was asked the question of who would I kick off of natural resource, and I'm like, "Ooh, I don't think I'd kick off anybody out of natural resources." So I was like, "What's the problem? Just add a couple more. Like, come on, what's your problem?" So we'll see where that goes.
So, like, all the Republicans want to be on natural resources, and all the Dems want to be on the green energy. Well, they want to be on energy and climate, right? So it's so.
Oh my gosh, I might end up on healthcare. We'll just go happy medium. We'll see where that goes.
I don't think Pam Marsh has to be on natural resources. So you could probably swap her out for you. I think it's fun. I'm looking at it.
Have a
Helm, I guess
Republican
he
majority
probably
on there.
he probably wants. Sounds great to me. I
Yeah.
guess Helm still wants to be the chair though, and so he has to stay. Yeah, I see your point.
Co-chairs.
It's not the worst committee. It's not the worst committee. Yes, co-chairs. It's very good. Oh, Gamba. I'd kick Gamba off of natural resources in a heartbeat. Kid you not.
He's from Portland. What does he know about natural resources?
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
The
All
smog.
right. Well, thank you. You guys were doing so good there for a little bit. Brian and I probably thought about taking a vacation. Keri Lopez and Emily McIntire hosting Crosstabs would be fantastic. You guys did excellent. I like how you guys work together. I think that's probably why Brian invited you both on the same time. It sounded good to me, but I didn't know you guys would work so well together. So hopefully we'll get to see you guys work together in the legislature. For Crosstabs, you can find us. Well, you found us if you're listening, but if you want to make sure that you're subscribed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. You can sign up for email notifications, crosstabs.studio. And if you're addicted to Twitter, at Brian D. Iverson, at Reagan Knope on Twitter. And we'll see you all next time.